Okay, and we are live again, painstakingly going through and finding all the possible times where I can check Graham Hancock, check his claims. I've already found a couple of lies. I'm going to make some more content on those. We're going to find times that he dodged questions. I already put out a little video of Flint Dibble. Wait, did I say Graham? I mean checking Flint Dibble's claims. Um, I've checked some of Graham's before. And we are going to also look at times that he laughed. I'm going to make a compilation because I think his laugh is super obnoxious. I think he's a ridiculous person. And the claims about Graham, claims about archaeology, and whatever is interesting. So that's what we're going to do here. And I've been doing this a little bit already. We're starting about halfway in. Yeah, about halfway in. Still got a few more hours to go. I'm listening to this at multiple times speeds.
Saying that they were destroyed at the end of the Ice Age, that there were a very small number of survivors, that those survivors settled amongst other hunter-gatherer peoples and benefited from their knowledge and exchanged knowledge with them. I am not saying that they introduced agricultural products to those people. I'm not saying they brought agriculture from where they came from. I'm saying that they helped to nurture the idea.
Am I good? You guys see me? Might be having some issues with my internet here, unfortunately. That's not good. We good? Someone say something in the comment. It looks like we're good. I hear you on Twitter. Okay. Thank you, Romans. All right. Let's keep going.
Let's discuss.
Before we do that, can I just,
Yes.
the issue of the Olmec heads?
Yes.
I have no view actually on what they are, but can I just show
Yes,
some pictures?
please.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Jamie. Let me get the, yeah. So these are the Olmec heads. Santa photographed these in Mexico way back in the early 1990s. They're certainly intriguing looking. I'm not sure whether they're Africans, whether they're Polynesians, or whether they're Maya. They could well be Maya.
Olmec.
I'm just interested. Yes,
Or Olmec.
They're Olmec.
Shut up.
A strong
Obviously,
connection
they're
to the
Olmec. You already said they're
civilization, the Maya
Olmec.
civilization. Maya, in a sense, are the inheritors of the Olmec civilization. I'm interested by things like this. I don't know what to make of them. These are Olmec figures from Trezopotes. In the center is a picture of Pharaoh Khafre wearing the Nemes headdress, and
I've got some content on how the Mayans, that's in my standalone videos. Check that out if you haven't. Not now, but later after this. That's a really good video I did with an archaeologist named Cam. Also, you can get all this stuff early and this and unedited on the Patreon for $2 a month.
intrigued by the fact that these Olmec figures wear a very similar headdress to that. I don't know what to make of it. I'm not saying that ancient Egyptians went to Central America. I'm not saying that Central Americans went to ancient Egypt. What I'm suggesting is that maybe both of them inherited a shared idea from an ancestral civilization that was ancestral to them both. And then in the same Olmec culture, we have these images. On the left, the figure that's often referred to as the ambassador. And on the right, the figures called the danzantes, the dancer figures from Monte Alban. I mean, Flint, what do you make of these figures? What sort of ethnic group would you think they belong to?
I don't identify ethnic groups like that, man.
Dude, you can identify ethnic groups by phenotype. This is not like he acts like it's racist for that. Like, I hate the way he says this. He says it like he's better than him.
I don't identify ethnic groups like that, man.
Like he's trouble.
It's a stone carving. That's not how.
That's not how we identify ethnic groups. See, this is another time when, you know, Grant or Flint is unwilling to think outside of his own methods of archaeology. And maybe that's why he calls Graham a pseudo-archaeologist, because he doesn't understand that other people have different ways of synthesizing and understanding information. And he views his method as superior and, in fact, the only way. I mean, he says this implicitly with how he talks about how this information is discussed. This is not an inherent, immutable way to view information. It's just not.
No, I'm not actually interested. So good. So you don't identify an ethnic group, but do you see beards on these figures?
Yeah, and people all over the world on every continent have beards from different ethnic groups.
It's just curious that amongst the Olmecs we have this.
Yeah, beards are, facial hair is more and less common, and this isn't even a phenotypical thing. It is actual data. about what percentage of the population and how like expansive their beards are. This is totally normal. This is a real statistical thing. And Graham here or Flint here is
I'm not actually interested. So good. So you don't identify an ethnic
understanding
group. But what, do you see beards on these figures?
Yeah, and people all over the world on every continent have beards from different ethnic groups.
It's just curious that amongst the Olmecs we have this, and we have this, and we have this, and I'm just intrigued by that. I don't know.
People look different.
I don't know what it means exactly.
People look different.
But I
Yes.
do find it intriguing.
And I see this as actually an example of the problems here because you cite Spanish colonial literature about, say, a white Quetzalcoatl coming. You talk about this as different kinds of people. Yes, you do.
We got to
Whoa,
get
whoa,
correct
whoa,
on this.
let's get
We
there.
got to get correct on this. Are you saying
See, this
Quetzalcoatl coming? You talk about this as different kinds of people. Yes, you different. Yes.
I don't know what it means exactly, but I do find it intriguing.
And I see this as actually an example of the problems here because you cite Spanish colonial literature about, say, a white Quetzalcoatl coming. You talk about this as different kinds of people. Yes, you do.
We got to get correct on this. We got to get correct on this. Are you saying that the whole story of the bearded, pale-skinned Quetzalcoatl was a Spanish invention?
Yes, I am. I can show you a depiction of Quetzalcoatl from the pre-Spanish period.
I can show you depictions.
Wait,
I can show you
no.
depictions too.
No, can I please get the? Here we
And
go.
again-
this is Quetzalcoatl on the Borgia Codex.
Again, Flint diverts from the actual thing that Graham is talking about, and he dodges it and sets his own agenda. He's so used to being in front of the classroom and being the one that's sharing the information that he's incapable of taking an even equal approach with other people. It's disgusting behavior.
Is from before any Europeans arrived in the New World.
Yeah.
This is on a hide. The ink has been analyzed, the hides have been analyzed, and this individual has tan skin, no beard, but a feathered headdress because this is the feathered serpent.
Well, actually, we can't see anything from that image, but that's not the point that I want to make. The point that I want to make is, do you think that the
So he in one stroke he says, "Oh, I don't identify ethnic groups by I don't identify ethnic groups from the stone carvings, but he can identify races based on an image that's on a hide."
the Spanish deliberately imposed an idea of Quetzalcoatl on the
I think that
Mexican.
every single source that we have of white skin in indigenous Americas comes from Spanish sources, and therefore I
who
see
are
it as,
quoting indigenous sources.
but quoting them inaccurately because people quote things in biased ways. This happens all the time.
How do you know they're quoting them inaccurately?
Because again, we have earlier representations
is there a
of these
document-
individuals
is there a
that show they
document-
don't have white skin. This is the
Dude, Quetzalcoatl is a wide god. There are dozens, hundreds of different interpretations of it. One piece of hide does not prove anything. It doesn't prove it one way or the other.
documents, Graham.
Is there a document against about this Spanish conspiracy? Do you regard the peoples of Mexico, the peoples of Colombia, the peoples of Bolivia as so stupid that they would simply accept an imposition upon them by the Spaniards?
So, no, I think that interpreting these kind of sources is difficult. And so, Jamie, do you mind playing my video by Curly Tlapoyawa?
Jesus
He's
Christ,
an indigenous
dude.
archaeologist here in Mexico. He is a co-host of the Tales from Atlantis podcast.
Can I interrupt you? How old is that image? The image you just showed?
It's from like the 14th century BC.
Okay.
14th century AD, you mean?
AD, sorry, yes, I misspoke. Chill.
So this is pre-Spanish
Chill.
invasion.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's been dated and studied, the hides and the
Loser.
inks.
Is there others of Quetzalcoatl from that period or before?
Yeah,
that?
there's other Quetzalcoatl
And they are
images, and they're
similar?
all very similar. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
No,
If
they're
you go on
not.
Wikipedia, there's several images of him.
Okay, go ahead, play this.
I'm Curly Tlapoyawa, an archaeologist and cultural consultant specializing in Mesoamerica. I want to briefly
Shut up,
talk about
white
why
boy.
expertise is
This
so
guy's a
important when it comes to
conquistador.
research
You're not
our
indigenous.
ancestral cultures. And I'm going to use the example of a mistake involving the Feast of Panquetzalistli, a Mexica ceremony celebrating the rebirth of the sun during the winter solstice. Panquetzalistli translates to the raising of the banners in the Nahuatl language. This refers to the multiple banners that are constructed to decorate the various temples and sacred centers associated with La Fiesta de Pan.
I don't
Became
care
erroneously
about this.
translated as Festival of Bread. Pan is context matters.
Context
Maybe over
matters.
the course of one generation, you would have a. Makes sense to me that if a group of people were conquered by white people who showed up on boats and dominated the society, that they would have a great influence on a lot of the myths and cultures. And not only that, but that they would heavily discourage deviation from the changes that they've made to those myths. And if you did that over the course of one generation, you would have a complete different narrative.
What intrigues me is that whether he's described as having white skin or a beard or not, we have a tradition of a civilizing hero, Quetzalcoatl in Mexico,
What's up, Frenchie?
Mexica in Colombia,
Good to see you.
Viracocha in Bolivia, depicted as a bearded individual who comes in a time of chaos, who teaches certain skills and then leaves. this tradition is a Pan-American tradition.
No,
David Carrasco, I think you have to respect the work of David Carrasco, has drawn attention to this, and to the notion that the magical pen of Cortez could somehow have hoodwinked an entire continent into making up myths. And I just don't think that's credible at all. I don't understand what your video is telling us either.
My video is trying to explain the complexity of difficulty of interpreting Spanish sources. Can I show a different video?
It's oh my God, he wants to show another video. Shut up,
that talks
dude.
about the complexity of Quetzalcoatl as a figure?
Sure.
Can you play the video by
Why I
the
don't
one by Marika Stoll, but not the
I don't understand why Joe just lets this fucking nerd like it God. Isn't that amazing? They always do this. A lot of early anthropologists assumed that monotheistic tribes of Aborigines were just picking it up by osmosis from Europeans. When I use the word tribe, I do not mean anything negative. Yeah. 12 tribes of Israel, 10 tribes. Yeah, I mean, look, there is always some influence, some bias in your interpretation, but Flint is not recognizing the bias of his own civilization that seeks to deify indigenous people. And, there's an element of that. So I don't know. It's very possible that this white Quetzalcoatl was, it was, imposed by Spanish conquistadors in Spanish culture. But this it's not like set in stone. This doesn't prove it.
Sure.
Can you play the video by the one by Marika Stoll, but not the hallucinogens one, the other one?
Dude, but okay, he wants to be objective, but he's allowing Flint to dominate. He's not being objective. He's like allowing Flint to change the topic away from what Graham is talking about. It's not objective. If he was being objective, I would be happy, but he's just allowing Flint to do whatever he wants and interrupt Graham and change the topic of conversation and divert.
Hallucinogens one, the other one.
Hello, everyone. My name is Marika Stahl. I'm an archaeologist and research associate at Indiana University.
God, this lady's
I also live in Oaxaca and work closely with rural indigenous communities. It's been claimed that archaeologists do not engage with indigenous myths. This is simply not true. But once again, context matters.
Oh my God. She's learned how to talk in a frickin' in a communications class in undergrad. Hide that. Oops. I'm just going to highlight this because it shows this is another time that Flint Dibble dodges the topic.
It makes sense to me that if a group of people were conquered,
including Quetzalcoatl or Lord Ninewind.
I'm skipping this because I'm looking for times that Flint does certain things. I've already reacted to this entire video.
There's a variety of different traditions. You pick and choose the one that you prefer for your story, which is fine. I think that your investigations and your beliefs are totally cool. I'm not going to convince you otherwise. Same with people listening. I'm trying to show the facts here and just how complex the situation is of indigenous myths, of archaeological evidence.
You're trying to show how complex something is, but you're doing it to divert from the topic at hand, which is like... Even if it's good information, which look, those videos are sharing fine information. Of course, they're biased just like anything else, but they're being used to obfuscate from the actual argument. Yeah, the whole podcast was just Flint rambling on things. It was, I wonder if future archaeology experts will see our postmodern bias. I mean, they will, because today they see bias that only goes back 50 years. There's no way they won't. It's up in the air how they will view it. That'll be based on the bias of the time, but everything has bias. Yeah. It's all about demonizing colonization. Yeah, it is. They have an anti-colonial bias. And regardless of if you think that's a good thing or a bad thing, it's a thing.
Have a lot of different evidence.
A Pan-American myth of a
here's
civilized
Graham trying to get back on.
could not have been imposed on the indigenous population entirely by Spaniards. So that's my view. That's David Carrasco's view as well. Again, if you look at my response to the SAA's attempt to get Netflix to reclassify my show as science fiction, you'll find detailed information on that there.
Let's move on. Sharing my screen really quickly?
can I pause it?
Again,
we
again.
know that once indigenous people are colonized, that they try to at least alter their beliefs and if not indoctrinate them into whatever beliefs they have. And we have recent evidence for that in North America, with how Native Americans were treated when they were put on reservations and brought into school systems and forced Christianity.
This is a thing.
And told that they couldn't use their language. I mean, we have very recent evidence of human beings trying to impose their ideas on the people that they've conquered. It makes sense to me that that would be something that would also have been done by the Spaniards that entered Mexico.
Yeah, I I'm not persuaded by that. In this case, the myth is too widespread, and that constant reference to a bearded figure is very odd. And as a civilization bringer in a time of chaos, in a time of disaster after a great cataclysm. Again, I mean, Flint and I can disagree on this. I'm intrigued by that information, and I don't think that the indigenous peoples of the Americas were so easily hoodwinked by the Spaniards.
I don't think it's hoodwinked. I think it's conquered.
Yeah.
I also think it's a lot more complex than that. So I
You're
study
so
ancient Greek
feminine.
mythology, and you can see how these
There he
oral
is
traditions changed
obfuscating
over time
away
anyway,
again.
even without being conquered, right? You can see, for example, the weapons, the spears and the shields that Homeric heroes use. Sue Sherritt has an article on this. And so, you can see how Achilles' spear changes its description from a big Bronze Age style spear, the kind of spear that we see in Bronze Age.
And what he's saying right now is changing of myths, but he's not talking about, like, the Maya are not one solid entity, okay? And this goes way beyond the Maya, this bearded figure. They don't invent brand new figures out of nowhere that has, yes, I will call him Flint Dibble for the rest of the stream. Yeah, Cam gave me that one, the archaeologist, the Mesoamerican archaeologist. But like, he's obfuscating again. He's talking about small changes that happen over time. That's true. But there are references to the bearded figure they've already admitted pre-Spanish, and that's all Graham is talking about. And yet both Flint Dibble and Joe Rogan's dumb Neanderthal ass is out here not understanding that. They're just not getting it. I think Flint gets it, but he's just trying to argue.
Flint and I can disagree on this. I'm intrigued by that information, and I don't think that the indigenous peoples of the Americas were so easily hoodwinked by the Spaniards.
I don't think it's hoodwinked. I think it's conquered.
Yeah.
And I also think it's a lot more complex than that. So I study ancient Greek mythology, and you can see, for example, the weapons, the spears and the shields that Homeric heroes use. Sue Sherritt has an article on this. And so, you can see how Achilles' spear changes its description from a big Bronze Age style spear, the kind of spear that we see in Bronze. He has a smaller Iron Age style spear. The kind of spear we see painted
Did
on
they
Iron Age
invent
props.
Achilles?
And so, you can see how these oral
Did
traditions.
they invent Achilles, and did he show up independently in all these different places, like thousands of miles away? Is that what happened? No. And you can see those change over time, and you can see the images of a bearded figure pre-Spanish colonization. So what are you talking about? You're not responding at all to what Graham is saying. I had to put that in there. Dodge questions.
And I also think it's a lot more complex than that. So I study ancient.
Imposed upon with their language, which we know to be fact, which is why Mexicans speak Spanish.
Some of these traditions were recorded by Bernardino de Sahagún within 20 years of the conquest. Bernardino de Sahagún is relied upon extensively by archaeologists.
Within 20 years after the conquest?
After
though?
the conquest,
Right, but man, you could do a lot in 20 years.
Yeah. Okay.
And again, there's just no evidence for these kind of culture heroes with this color skin or those kind of.
Let's take a
beards
bathroom
that
break.
are-
He's not talking about the color skin. He said that several times, Graham, or Flint Dibble. He said that several times. You idiot.
I do care about the culture heroes.
Okay, we'll take a bathroom break. We'll come back. Much more to talk about. Okay.
Thank you all.
All right, we're back.
I'd like to pick up on this issue of Quetzalcoatl and on Sahagún and on the interpretation of indigenous traditions. And this is in my reply to the Society for American Archaeology and their attempt to have my series reclassified as science fiction, where they suggest that all these stories were made up. David Carrasco is a leading scholar of the Americas, and he writes, I have no doubt that Cortes was striving to impress the royal mind with his extraordinary management skills, or that his literary craft was elegant and profoundly political. What is challenging to me is Glendinnin's, she's just another one of these archaeologists who say that it was all made up, Glendinnin's claim that this Spanish political fiction of both Quetzalcoatl returning and Moctezuma's vacillation and collapse was picked up by Sahagún, who powerfully reinforced it, erroneously thinking it was an Indian belief when in fact the ruler's gesture of abdication was a very late dawning story, making its first appearance 30 or more years after the conquest. The stunning implication is that this Spanish fiction, the story of Moctezuma's paralysis, parades down the years through the literature and scholarship and is internalized by commentators less wary than Glendinnin, all the way to Leon Portilla, who falls unconsciously under Cortez's charismatic pen along with the rest of us. This means that Leon Portilla's extensive Nahuatl training and sense of the Aztec ethos, not to mention Sahagún's profound familiarity with Spanish native exchanges, contribute no effective critical stance in relation to the Spanish literary craft, which later Spaniards were not aware of and which a number of Indians internalized as their own. I'm quoting from David Carrasco here. I'm simply stating that this issue about Quetzalcoatl is more complicated than Flint would perhaps wish us to believe.
Well, no, I've stated from the very beginning that it's extremely complicated, that there's a lot of different versions of Quetzalcoatl mythology, and so I think that it's wrong to say that there's only one version of that. And
I don't say there's only.
He didn't say that. He did not say that.
And
I don't say there's only one.
Well, you only use one in your argument. And
That's
so
true.
I tend to think, though, also that this is fairly irrelevant at this point, because I think what we're still missing is any kind of accurate archaeological evidence with dates. So when you go, for example, to the Olmec heads, or you talk about Quetzalcoatl, or when you talk about any of the kind of evidence that you have of Yonaguni underwater, we're still missing dates and how this relates to your larger hypothesis of a lost Ice Age civilization. And so I think that that's important to think about well-dated evidence. So do you mind if I go into...
Dude, the archaeologists are not looking at it. That's why we don't have dates. It's not that they looked and they didn't find the evidence. It's that they're not looking for this evidence. So it's irrelevant that you bring this up.
my argument about the domestication of plants and food and things like that?
Sure.
Okay.
Could I just...
He
simply
changes
start
it
about
again.
Danny?
He
Danny
changes
Hillman
it again.
And Gunung Padang. I do have a major article on my site where Danny refutes the retraction of his paper. And there are some images with that, which will perhaps help us to understand what he's talking about. Sorry, I'm having to scroll through an enormous amount of material here. There's a very long article on my website.
Like you, I've probably created like 500 slides for this conversation.
This is not a slide. I'm live on my website here. I don't know how to get to the bottom of this enormous piece of work.
You don't have a slider on the right-hand side?
I tried to use it, and when I used it, it did something weird.
You do like a
I just want to get to the end of it. These pictures that so-called Kujang stone or man-made artifact, but it's really these are the different units that have been identified with the remote sensing.
not actually with remote sensing. Those units were identified from a scarp that was exposed, but that's okay.
I'm not finding the pictures I want here.
What are you trying to find?
I'm trying to find the rocks, Gunung Padang columnar rocks. It's the way.
I actually don't
You
care
talking
about
like the
Gunung
8,
Padang.
9,
I've already
Yeah,
talked
yeah.
upon
And
it.
those are at 20.
I've said I don't believe
It's
it.
a terrace slope in a sense.
Right, so that's what has been
That-
evidence visual.
Yes.
So is it that's
test is what I call
right?
it. Yeah.
So it's
Ooh.
I'm sorry, it's too big. It's too big an article for me to go through. It's there on my website. It's Danny's retraction.
Laughing.
It's Danny's refutation of the retraction.
But what are you specifically looking for in this?
I'm looking for his ground penetrating radar and his seismic
Why don't
tomography.
you just do a search for ground penetrating radar on this page? Just was it Command F?
Ended up in the article being retracted instead
Which
of.
I want to point out, when I interviewed Dr. Yondri, his goal talking to me was to write a response. Like, we never got in touch with the journal to retract. It was other people that did that. We wanted to write a response, and I think we're still aiming to do so. So that's our goal. Like, I don't know.
About young, but
yeah, about
this-
Gunung Padang. Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
My website, I'd just like to say that I've recently put up a major article concerning Göbekli Tepe and the issue of whether we're looking at a transfer of technology or gradual evolution or both. There's been a huge amount of research done around Göbekli Tepe. Archaeologists have suggested that research vitiates my argument that Göbekli Tepe was a transfer of technology. I've been investigating that research in depth, and my view is it strengthens my argument enormously. But again, we're getting into material that's too far and too deep to go into here. I would just like.
No, I think we should get into
I'd
this
like-
a
I'd
little
like-
bit.
What makes you think it's a transfer of technology?
Well,
Of course, Flint again trying to change the conversation.
I've been investigating that research in depth, and my view. Start off my Netflix series by saying it's an enormous site. You can't just wake up one morning with no prior skills, no prior knowledge, no background in working with stone and create something like Göbekli Tepe. There has to be a long history behind it, and that history is completely missing.
You mean the Natufian culture?
To me, it very strongly speaks of a lost civilization, transferring their technology, their skills, their knowledge to hunter-gatherers. And what I've done in this article is I've brought up to date my
Yes,
investigation
I'm
into
a
Göbekli Tepe. Of course,
Scientologist.
the Natufians are dealt with at great length in this article. How do I search Natufian? There are many predecessor cultures. The question is...
Who worked in stone?
Who worked in stone. The question is, when did this stonework, if you look at the research by Hackley and Gopher, for example, and of the introduction of geometric elements into the stonework in pre-Göbekli Tepe cultures, you find that almost all of it comes after the beginning of the Younger Dryas, not before the beginning of the Younger Dryas. There is an interesting development at Ain Malaha in Israel, also called Ainan, where some kind of geometric plan seems to have been put into place. But the bulk of the work, the bulk of the I hate to use the word that archaeologists dislike, a Neolithic revolution, but the bulk of the revolution took place after the Younger Dryas.
So that's why you think it's evidence of a transfer.
Yes,
of,
I do.
Except that the fact that there's no domesticated plants or animals at Göbekli Tepe. So if there's a transfer of knowledge, why are they not transferring agriculture?
They've
Well,
only
there was actually
there's only like 10% of it that's been excavated, and they're planning on not excavating a lot of it. So we don't really know that. Okay, that's a stupid claim.
Agriculture.
Well, there was actually agriculture in Abu Huraira, for
But not at
example.
Göbekli Tepe.
No,
Abu
but
Huraira is a Natufian site
would you-
that was occupied before Göbekli Tepe.
Okay, there doesn't need to be. Obfuscating, dodged questions. Yeah, I mean, look, Abu Huraira is close enough that they could have done farming. Pilgrimage sites are very normal. you wouldn't need to have domesticated animals or domesticated plants to prove that there was any for the people that were using this location.
Yeah,
It
we
was a
have.
sacred site. Göbekli Tepe was a sacred site.
And we know that they're hunting gazelles by the thousands and harvesting wild
Yes,
plants.
yeah.
This has been published ad nauseum by people like Laura Dietrich, who have talked about the kind of plants that they're harvesting and the
Right, but
isotopes.
was it possible that they just didn't bring food to this area because it was a sacred site for ceremony and ritual, and perhaps not at all for people to live in?
No,
and
it seems
people
more
to
like
eat
they were
in
there
and-
about half of the year. So they're there during the warm months. If you look at the harvesting season from the plant remains we have, and then the wild plants that are gathered, and then if you look at the isotope evidence and the mortality profile from the teeth of the animals that they're slaughtering, we see that they're there basically during the warm 6 months of the year. So this is
But
still
not at Göbekli Tepe.
At Göbekli Tepe, I'm talking about. Yeah, for about 6 months out of the year, that's when people are there harvesting these. And so I sort of say they found an ecological niche and they've learned how to exploit this. And to sort of stay there for half the year, they probably went to the lowlands during the other half of the year, which is a fairly common mobile pastoral or hunter-gatherer strategy, which is
That's
where you
true.
move to where the food is in different seasons, right? And so that area is a very
Right.
naturally abundant area during the warm months. And so, there's so much more that's under excavation right now by Lee Clare and other colleagues that shows sort of domestic spaces around this ceremonial center that we have. I sort of think of it as like Washington, D.C. We have the ceremonial center in downtown, and then we have the less nice looking areas outside.
Is it possible that there was a sophisticated culture that also was hunter-gatherers because the resources were so rich that they didn't need agriculture?
Yeah, I think that's what we're seeing in this period. It's sort of.
So there was no need to grow plants. Because
I think
plants
they
are
found a
plentiful.
successful niche
Right.
and they really exploited it and did a great job with it. And so I think that that's what's going on right in this period. And it's also the period where we can start to see the start of domestication.
And so do you think that that also explains the resources that were required to build such immense stone structures, that they had the time to do this because they had abundant food?
Yeah, they had abundant food 6 months out of the year, and while they're there, they had the time to build those kind of structures.
But
Exactly.
were they the first of those kinds of structures, you think, that were...
Well, I mean, that's a tough question to ask. So, I mean, we certainly have T-shaped pillars from other sites in the region. In fact, there were some that were found by Klaus Schmidt before he found Göbekli Tepe at Navali Chori. And
It's a younger
so-
site. Navali Chori is a younger site.
It is a younger site, and so I think there's more invested. But what we do have is good monumental architecture from that period that we've known about for 60 years. If you go to Tel Es Sultan or Jericho, there's a pre-pottery Neolithic tower there, and so it's an enormous, not megalithic, but enormous monumental structure that we've known about in that area from the exact same period. And
So this is pre-metallurgy? This is
all pre-metallurgy.
Pre-wheel?
Yeah, well, yeah, probably pre-wheel.
And
but
where are
that's
they
tough to
getting
tell.
these stones from?
From the area, most of them seem to be local. The quarries at Göbekli Tepe are right nearby.
And how do you think they moved those things?
There's so many different ways to move large stones. There's been so many different experiments that show with rollers or ropes, you can get enough people and know-how, levers, and you can do that. And so, there's so many videos.
The rollers and ropes and levers. That's not what they did. God, they would have the size of these stones just crushes wood. It doesn't work. Yeah, and they're not excavating a lot of it.
Where are they getting these stones from?
From the area, most of them seem to be local. The quarries at Göbekli Tepe are right nearby.
And how do
Stones weighing many many tons.
I don't think there's any mystery around the moving of the stones.
Yeah.
And I don't claim that there is. I think what's intriguing.
not Göbekli Tepe, but there certainly is in Egypt.
Yes, Egypt's a bigger mystery, and we can go into that.
Show us how
But
that's
what intrigues me about Göbekli Tepe is the precision, the underlying geometrical plan of the site, and the astronomical alignments of Göbekli Tepe. And I think that the transfer of technology that I referred to did take place. It took place gradually. There's a site called Tel Karamal. You've spoken of Jericho. The Tower of Jericho is fascinating. It's a sort of Neolithic skyscraper in a way, but it's after the Younger Dryas. There's Tel Karamal, which has got 5 towers. Kotik Tepe, Wantuklu Tara, Abu Huraira. Abu Huraira is a fascinating site, and it was hit by an airburst. According to the team working on the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis, Abu Huraira, the destruction of Abu Huraira took place because one of those comet fragments, 12,800 plus years ago, exploded over Abu Huraira within 100 or 200 miles of Göbekli Tepe.
It's certainly a controversial point. I'm not an expert on this particular topic, but I know a lot of people that believe that the evidence is not there for the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis.
Yeah, there's a huge dispute going on about it. It's an
not my
interesting,
specialty, though.
it's
But
an
I would like
interesting
to say-
discussion in science.
I would like to say that destruction is an archaeologist's best friend. So when sort of a site is destroyed suddenly from earthquakes, from volcanoes, from warfare, from fire, it actually helps preserve material for us. And so, if there is this kind of global catastrophe, that should make things more preserved and easier for archaeologists to find.
But isn't that dependent upon the scale of the catastrophe?
Well, no, because even like it's not going to be incineration everywhere because we still have hunter-gatherer evidence everywhere.
Right,
And
but,
so,
but it could be incineration in a lot of places, and the hunter-gatherer
Flint laughing.
of hunter-gatherer evidence everywhere.
Right,
And
but,
so,
but it could be incineration.
hunter-gatherer evidence going back hundreds of thousands of years.
Right, but
and
when
in
you
all
look
those
at
periods.
have you seen the evidence of the Younger Dryas impact theory in terms of like iridium levels, nanodiamonds?
I'm not someone who's qualified to be able to comment on that. I'm more thinking about it from an archaeological point of view, which is that if there was a destruction, just like with Pompeii or Herculaneum with the pyroclastic flow, that stuff helps preserve material for us. Same thing with earthquakes knocking over buildings.
Right.
Okay, but he's talking about volcanoes, which doesn't preserve in the same way that an airburst would.
Would an atom bomb preserve material for us?
Yes, because the atom bomb, the very center of it might vaporize stuff, but then the whole area that gets abandoned afterwards because of the radiation, that actually is going to make that area an archaeological paradise for people once that radiation goes away.
But if Randall
It's gonna
Carlson's
be-
work,
Is that true? Because that's not what we've seen in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, where people still live in the area and the area around it. So what are you talking about?
work on the impact to what was the ice that was covering North America.
In one small landscape.
What do you mean?
Meaning he talks about it in the Scablands, right?
Not just the scablands. He talks about that, but he also just talks about that there's massive evidence of intense erosion. So very quick water flow that happened through an area that was absolutely devastating.
I mean, look, so the more rapid a destruction is, the better it preserves for us, just like with sea level
Dude, what are you talking about? The more rapid it is, does it matter what type of destruction it is? Like,
rise.
Right, but dependent upon how strong the force is, right?
to
And if
imagine
it's
how-
something.
But if it's a global catastrophe, how is it so strong everywhere, yet it's not wiping out our evidence from hunter-gatherers at this exact same time? We have ephemeral traces, footprints, campgrounds, fires, and hearths. We
Right,
have
because
lithics.
human beings did survive, right?
Yeah, but we have it from
but you just said that it would preserve that.
this exact same period.
Right, but human beings did survive at that same
And it
period.
didn't wipe out the traces of them from that period.
But the traces you're talking about are stone tools and
Hearths, footprints, things like that that
Yeah.
are extremely ephemeral, animal bones and seeds. We have all of these things from the period around this supposed destruction.
But do you have them in the area where the supposed destruction
We don't
occurred?
know where the supposed destruction happened because
Right, but
nobody's
when-
ever found that.
But with Randall Carlson's descriptions of these massive floods of water, just hundreds of millions of pounds of water.
Well, let's go to J. Harlan Brett's long before Randall Carlson. I mean, the Channel Scablands are an enigma. The massive water flows. I don't think anybody's disputing that massive amounts of water flow through there. It's a question of exactly when that happened and why.
Well,
it
also,
happened.
what would be left over in that area? There's not evidence of hunter-gatherers in that area from that
Well, I
time.
remember he showed, when he was here last, he showed sort of mammoth bones from that kind of period.
No, that was from Siberia, though, wasn't it? Was it from Siberia or?
I don't remember, but it
wasn't
certainly
the
wasn't
same. It's right,
wasn't
right,
from
right.
the Channel Scablands. But
No.
let's cut to the chase here. 12,800, between 12,900 and 12,800 years ago, a very dramatic climate episode occurred, and that's called the Younger Dryas. The world had been gradually warming up before that, and then suddenly it went very, very cold. There is evidence of a 6-meter sea level rise at exactly that time, which is very hard to explain, but it looks like the suggestion is that that was due to impacts on the ice cap, on the North American ice cap, and perhaps on the European ice cap. The evidence for the Younger Dryas impact is found in what are called impact proxies, and that's iridium, nanodiamonds, platinum, melt glass like trinitite, found in sites across a vast area of the Earth's surface. 50 million plus square kilometers, an enormous area. Abu Huraira, next to Göbekli Tepe, happens to be one of those areas. And what they're suggesting is that a fragment of a comet blew up in the sky, that it was an airburst, exactly the same thing that happened over Tunguska in Siberia on the 30th of June, 1908. That was an object that fell out of the sky, almost certainly out of the Taurid meteor stream, which is thought to be the progenitor of the remnant giant comet, because that's the peak of the Beta Taurids. It wasn't big enough to hit the Earth and create a crater. It blew up in the sky. When it blew up in the sky, fortunately over an uninhabited area of Siberia, it flattened 2,000 square miles of trees. It was absolutely
Where's the
catastrophic.
evidence for that?
If it had,
No, there is evidence
There
for
is
that,
evidence
though.
for that.
No.
Compelling evidence.
There's not?
No, Vance Halliday and his colleagues just published a huge refutation of this entire.
What the hell? You're saying that the... Oh my God.
Calling something a refutation doesn't mean it's a refutation.
No, but it still has not
We
been
have-
replied to. That's currently the
well,
record
actually,
of what there
it has
is.
been
Not-
replied to extensively by Martin Sweatman.
But are you
in a blog
are
post.
you referring to Abu Huraira? Are you referring
I'm referring
to
to the entire idea of the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis.
right? But
Yeah.
Tunguska, you're not.
No, I'm not debating Tunguska.
But that's what you were saying.
That's
And
what
I
you
misheard
just
him.
said.
I misheard him.
Yeah, yeah,
He
sorry.
was talking about the amount of forest that was flattened by the Tunguska.
I
event.
misheard him. I thought he was
Right, and
talking
it
about.
did
yeah.
happen during the Taurid meteor shower.
Yeah, I guess it happened
Yeah.
recently, like 100 years ago. Or
Yeah,
something,
but
right?
it did happen.
1908.
But it did happen during the same time of the year where the Earth passes through.
Okay, yeah. I'm not debating Tunguska.
Okay,
yeah,
that was what it seemed like.
I
You just
apologize.
said.
What you
I think
did-
this would be a good moment for me to just give a little bit of information about the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis. Can we do that? Because it's very important to my feelings about all
Okay.
of this. God, these short sight. I tell you, being 73 is no joke. So the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis, more than 60 eminent scientists, of course some scientists oppose them as well, was hit 12,800 years ago by multiple fragments of a disintegrating comet. Mark Boslow is one of the authors of that refutation piece that you've just put in. Here he is saying that Graham Hancock's use of the impact hypothesis in Netflix is all wet. Here we have a post responding to that. Graham Hancock is a charlatan and a fraud. Younger Dryas impact hypothesis is widely debunked. I'm sorry, it's not. If you want to learn about the work done, go see Mark Boslow. Here's that paper you're talking about, Flint, the comprehensive refutation of the Younger Dryas hypothesis. Because something is called something does not mean it is something.
Have you read it? It's fairly detailed.
I have read it in great detail, and I've also read James Lawrence Powell, who the authors of this paper largely ignore, but who is a highly respected figure, and in whose view the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis has been prematurely rejected. Bill Napier is a member of the Comet Research Group. He's the person who's connected it to the Taurid meteor stream. He's talking about the evidence of a large comet about entering the inner solar system about 20,000 years ago, going into fragmentation, creating a wide debris trail through which the Earth passes twice a year. And it's a catastrophe of celestial origin which occurred around 12,900 BC, BP, before the present. Now, you're referring to a refutation paper, but would you really so quickly accept it when you look at the credentials of the people in the Comet Research? I mean, James Kennett, marine geologist, professor at the University of California, he's a world expert in paleoceanography. Dr. Richard Firestone, James Whitker, Albert Goodyear, Alan West. There I am with Alan West at the Younger Dryas boundary in Murray Springs. And the Younger Dryas boundary is full of the signatures of a massive cosmic impact, probably an airburst, rather like the airburst that took place over Abu Huraira. I'm not expecting anybody to read these papers I'm putting up here. I'm just saying that the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis has been widely published, extensively published over the last decade, that there's a huge amount of information in support of it. There we're looking at the Younger Dryas boundary field, extending on the right as far as Abu Huraira, and on the left covering most of North America. It's also found in Belgium, by the way. It's found in the deep south of Chile. It's found in Antarctica. It's found all over the world. This platinum anomaly, documented at the Younger Dryas onset, is particularly important. But the evidence of a cosmic impact at Abu Huraira, that one, I mean, we know that Michael Shermer is an opponent of my work. But even Michael Shermer, in my view, by the way, I want to thank Michael for this, a true gentleman. And here he says, in the light of the work at Abu Huraira, he says he's going to address his priors about my theory in the light of this evidence from a massive cosmic impact over Abu Huraira. The fact that a paper has been published which claims to refute the Younger Dryas impact is really not anything at all. The question is, what's the depth to that refutation? Is it a solid refutation? Does it really work? And why is it that the same team who claimed to have refuted the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis in 2023 also published a requiem for the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis in 2011? Clearly there was something wrong with their 2011 requiem.
I am not a scholar that focuses on these kind of questions.
Then
I focus on archaeological evidence, so I'm going to try to reply from that perspective. And so one of the examples you give is if this is Abu Huraira, for example, the site is still there for us to excavate. Indeed. We understand that it has some of the earliest domesticated crops there. And so the entire point is that this kind of, even if this hypothesis is true, it would not have wiped out the evidence for the civilization that you're looking for. Because we can see very clearly that if it's true at Abu Huraira, it did not wipe out the entire settlement. It's there, we're excavating it now.
Isn't Abu Huraira one of the first places that show evidence of real agriculture?
Yeah, so let's talk about some real agriculture.
That's part of the evidence.
Yeah, so can we talk about some agriculture?
Sure.
All right, cool. Can you boot up my HD?
Got all excited.
Yeah, this is like my stuff finally. I did my dad's stuff earlier, now I get to do some of my stuff. In fact, this is some of the sites I work on. Okay, I want to be clear that we have a lot of evidence for ancient plants and seeds, right? I'll show you the statistics, we have hundreds of thousands, millions of these just from the time period of thinking about domestication. So how do we even collect tiny little seeds of grains and beans and peas?
Dude, so annoying. He dodges it again.
Focuses on these kind of questions. I focus on archaeological evidence, so I'm going to try to reply from that perspective. And
look, I depends on human beings.
I'm going to skip this.
And how do we identify that?
I responded to this in the other time when I did the whole stream of the whole thing. He talks about archaeobotany, which is great.
Then all of a sudden, there's an evolutionary sort of impact on the plant itself. And so what's selected for is the mutation for a seed that hangs onto the plant. Do you see what I mean? Because you're cutting here on the left in wild wheat, while it's a much sort of tougher scar, just statistically speaking, and by sampling wild wheat today, that this is.
So he's talking about biomarkers in the botany, in the archaeobotany at this time, and it actually supports Graham's hypothesis because it's like, oh, this is where agriculture showed up. It's not a refutation of what Graham says.
See this later on in the Holocene, so we're talking several thousand years later, like 5,000 statistics of it happening, changing statistically over time, the population of humans now collecting it and then planting it. So as soon as there's one seed that's like that with that mutation, it slowly proliferates every single time humans replanted it in a new field.
And it just takes
thousands of years. Chickpeas, peas, common beans, runner beans, soybeans.
Before this starts showing?
It starts showing up a small percentage of the crops that are actually have this feature to
So it looks like just 150 years it starts changing.
Yeah, it slowly starts changing over. In fact, Gordon Hillman first worked out this would happen really rapidly, that it would take just a few hundred years for the population of these plants to change over. Now we know it takes a few thousand years for it to fully.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
It's fascinating how the plant figures it out, that this is the way to survive.
It's really cool because it's not human selection either. In fact, 40 years ago when we first started studying domestication, we thought that all this was due to conscious human selection. And now we know that it's actually the plant adapting to us and what we do. Yeah, it's cool as hell, isn't it?
I agree with you on all of that. I don't want to stop you with your presentation, but what bearing does that have on getting rid of a lost civilization?
I'm going to get there. Like, again, it's not about getting rid of a lost civilization. I'm actually here to show that there's no agriculture at all in the Ice Age. It doesn't have to do with a lost civilization, but that's a key component of your civilization. So the second trait.
There's no agriculture at all amongst the Inuit either, right?
No.
Right.
But
they survived.
But in his books and in his Netflix series, he describes the civilization as introducing agriculture. He talks about seed banks and things like that.
Do I?
Oh yeah, in the Magicians of the Gods. I have a quote in here.
Show me.
Okay, you want me to?
yeah.
yeah.
Let's see it. I want to see it.
Give me a second. It seems fanciful to you want to use it? I can't do your accent.
You want to read it?
It seems fanciful to imagine that we might, in an almost high-tech sense, be looking at the specifications of a seed bank here. Oh, this is from Fingerprints of the Gods.
No, it's from Magicians of the Gods.
Oh, maybe I repeated it in Magicians. And this is about the underground Vara that Yima is said in myth to have created following a disastrous cataclysm.
But is it possible that this cycle of domesticating wheat and beans and all these different things has taken place many, many times? And that if you left them alone, they would go back to the wild form, where if there was a disaster and people stopped growing them in this particular region, how long would it take for them to revert back to their original
Thousands
state?
of years.
Yeah, snack entity. The way this is actually very common for archaeologists. A lot of archaeologists and anthropologists dress a little bit like Indiana Jones. I'm actually I'm guilty of this myself. I base the way I dress a little bit off of not only Indiana Jones, but more specifically two archaeologists that I worked with in the past. Who is the late Brian Jones, unfortunately, who died an untimely death from pancreatic cancer, who is the former state archaeologist of Connecticut, as well as Professor Brian McBride, who is probably the foremost archaeologist on Pequot Native Americans, who are the Native Americans whose territory formed the state of Connecticut, and who I did a number of digs with, including my archaeological field school. But they seem to have based their dress off of Indiana Jones as well. There's some practicality towards it with the way that, with dressing this way in archaeology digs, but there also seems to be an influence from Indiana Jones.
Domesticating wheat and beans and all these different things has taken place many, many times. And that if you left them alone, they would go back to the wild form, where if there was a disaster. How many thousands of years you think?
Well,
them to revert back to their original
thousands
state?
of years ago.
Thousands of years
Yeah,
again.
thousands of years.
How many thousands of years you think?
Well, I don't know, because I'd have to look that up.
In
I know
this-
that we've observed this kind of stuff, feral, domesticates going feral, but I don't have that off
And
the
you
top
said
of
how
my
many
head.
years from the original till the whole crop?
Something like
was
3,000 years.
3,000
Dorian Fuller's actually published a lot on estimating.
But Graham is only talking about providing, he's only talking about the concept of domestication. He's not, he has specifically said several times that he's not saying they introduced domestic plants. He's saying they introduced the idea of domestication. So all the stuff that Flint says is actually evidence of that.
theory. And then people are resorted to hunter-gatherers again. It takes a long time before they start using agriculture again. Is it
That's not what
possible?
he's claiming. He's claiming that.
Yeah, I know, but I'm
yeah.
asking. Is it possible that those plants
one
would
thing I'm-
revert and
one
then the
thing I'm-
process would happen again once people started growing them intentionally?
That's tough to tell, because what we see is it's exactly at that time, at least in Southwest Asia, where this domestication starts.
Yes,
Right, we
that's
haven't seen
evidence
the
for
reverse happen.
Flint,
No,
for
no.
Graham.
But is it possible?
Well, I mean, it would have to have happened a lot earlier.
But
you see what I
if
mean.
people weren't cultivating it anymore, wouldn't the natural selection revert back
Yes,
to the
it
original
would.
state?
I agree with that. It would revert back.
But it would take a long time.
It would take a long time. And so I want to get into how the next trait size takes thousands of years after that, which is the selection for large seeds. So we measure these seeds, and we can see their change over time. And I have here a really cool.
Is this a...
So this is done from a lot of experimental archaeology.
That is
yeah.
so wild.
Glynis Jones, Dorian Fuller, Sheffield, who's retired now.
At it in terms of what we know for sure with plants. It is such a bizarre world.
Almost mysterious.
Oh
There's
my
a lot to
God,
learn.
So mysterious. Oh,
And
well, there's a lot to learn for sure. But
I think that's what's cool, because we have this kind of stuff. So you asked about selection.
Yeah.
So this is maize cob from about 1250 AD. This is part of the Southern Methodist University
What
archaeology.
that's how
does
little
it-
they were back then.
That's
No,
how little
wow.
they were. So if you want to hold it, you can.
Sure, yeah. Chuck it over here. How old is this?
That's from about 800 years ago. Yeah.
Okay,
And so I want to thank
was this
Matthew
a
Bullinger.
full
Yeah,
piece
that's
of
a full
corn?
cob. Yeah.
Folks, this is like a thumb. Not even my thumb. It's like one of my smaller fingers.
And just to get
It's
a sense
crazy.
of
Like I think of a corn cob today. It's just, I mean, I had one over Thanksgiving. It was massive. It was like this big.
exactly.
We
Now
grow
that's
like a
human selection.
forearm now.
That's human selection at that point.
It's
Yeah.
crazy. That's amazing.
And to give you a sense of just how much we find, this is our charred corn kernels. Again,
Oh, wow. So tiny.
And the
Are
only
these
way-
like dehydrated?
they're charred.
They're charred, right? But would
that's
they
how
be
it's
larger?
surprised. Yeah, they probably a lot of experiments to understand that,
That's
so that we
cool.
can see the shape and the size and stuff like that.
Yeah, that's so cool.
So to get back to your question, though, because I think you asked a good question. When we think about sort of this change over time with domestication,
God.
we, before we start seeing these sickle-type blades associated with harvesting these crops. project. I was actually doing the flotation to collect the plants from this project when I was a student, and this is in Albania, directed by University of Cincinnati. So these are the trenches that we excavated. But this is one of the earliest agricultural sites in Europe from about 6400 BC, right? And what's really cool is we can see what this kind of introduction looks like. We see a full package introduced at the same time. We see multiple different domesticated plants, multiple different domesticated animals, as well as new types of artifacts like stone tools and pottery of different types than what the hunter-gatherers were using there. And so this is kind of a parallel. This is where we see this transfer of technology, is when agriculturalists spread out and they take a whole package with them. We call it the Neolithic package, right? And so that's one of the key things, is we have parallels for this. And so when we go back to this sort of end of the Stone Age type period, where we're maybe looking for something like a seed bank or a shelter that's keeping these Noah's Ark or something like that, what we can also look at is it doesn't look like anything's introduced. These plants and animals get domesticated in their natural regions where their wild progenitors were growing and living. And so there's not like an introduction of a new species that was not
said
there.
there was.
Instead, we already saw these wild plants in place in the Ice Age in these spaces, and then we can date directly these with radiocarbon, right? There's no reason to assume anything else. We date plant remains and bones directly. And then lastly, I just want to talk about not archaeological, paleoecological proxies around the Greek peninsula under an electron microscope from Dartmouth College, I think it is, this image. And so, we have these kind of cores that give us a sense of the landscape. And, we can track, for example, the rise of different agricultural societies from pollen that floats through the air. We can track, for example, tree crops when they start getting introduced and when they become common. We can track grains and when they come in and become very common in these different regions. And the key thing I want to draw your attention to is a lot of these proxies, these cores, are taken from coastal areas. And some are even taken from underwater. So we have underwater cores from the seabed, and we can reconstruct these sunken
Look, it's cool stuff. It's not relevant. He's talking about...
We have evidence against it.
Like, I know I've said this before, but like, it's not like Flint Dibble doesn't have good experience and good knowledge on this type of stuff. He's also a pretty good communicator of it. He's not bad at this. But like, the stuff that he's talking about is very interesting, very cool, but it's not relevant to the questions. He's obfuscating. And that's very frustrating. Flint got that hat for Christmas as a token of goodwill from his wife's boyfriend. Oh my God. Here you go, little tyke. Have this hat. You'll look so cool. Oh, I'm going to wear it on Joe Rogan, and I'm going to put my headphones down like this so I can keep my stupid hat on. Flint Dibble, you fucking loser. Flint Dribble, rather.
Probably too hostile of a condition for agriculture in the Ice Age. The reason why is because there's too little CO2. Plants need carbon dioxide to be able to propagate and grow and be grown intensively in particular. It's also
You're
a period of
carbon
aridity. It's very
dioxide
dry because so much of the fresh water is trapped at the poles, and the ice travels really far. And so you're able to on the stub of a wall, and we check what we do know from right after this period of domestication. And so what we do know is all this kind of natural evidence about the climate, about the ecology, and about how domestication actually happens. And so that's why I think that, unlike the other part with the Ice Age sort of coastal stuff, I think that's sort of like, why do we keep finding tens of thousands of sites? That's not true. We have 13,000 different sites in the Paleolithic radiocarbon age sites that are hunter-gatherers. It's a bit of a coincidence we don't find your civilization. Here,
It's not tens of thousands, it's 3,000 sites.
that's not true. We have 13,000 different sites in the Paleolithic radiocarbon database.
No, I'm talking about underwater.
Okay, but we have 3 million shipwrecks that have been mapped.
Not relevant.
According to
There's
UNESCO, and they're on the continental shelves.
Can I pick up on some points you've made, or are you not quite finished yet?
Sure, you can pick up, Graham.
I don't ever claim that...
I gotta mark these laughs. I'm gonna make a compilation of these laughs. So obnoxious.
Sure, you can pick up, Graham.
Oh, thanks for the permission.
I don't
you
ever claim
fucking...
that the very small numbers of survivors of my proposed lost civilization introduced plant species. What I'm saying is that they introduced the concept of domesticating plants. There is evidence of early, very early agriculture, more than 20,000 years ago at Ahalo
Gatherers.
Yeah, of Ahalo 2.
Yeah.
They weren't. It never reached the stage of domestication.
Yeah,
and
they're gathering, not planting.
That goes back 24,000 years ago. They gathered,
20,000, I think.
but they did not domesticate. And there are a number of attempts at domestication, but it's after the Younger Dryas that we see this sudden surge in domestication. Now, I'm not saying, and I've never said, and you will not be able to find a quote where I've said that they introduced agriculture. They introduced the idea of agriculture. And we're talking about a very small number of people. The myths speak of 7 sages, again and again, in multiple locations around the world, bringing the idea of agriculture, but the agriculture is then applied to locally available plant species. And we do then see the long process of domestication beginning.
Which fits in with the idea that this ancient lost civilization, and I don't think there is enough evidence. I don't know if there is enough evidence to show this lost civilization. Personally, I don't think there is. I think it's interesting enough to continue to be seen. And I've talked before about how the evidence is not really being looked for. And I think they've demonstrated some of that here. This has to do, I've talked before about the layers, the layers of going down and how things, sediment layers, like the lower ones are the oldest. They're not going to go down there and look. So it's like when they're saying these sites have been looked at, it doesn't mean they've looked at those lower layers. And I wish that Graham Hancock would talk about this. But this idea of using the ecology of the local place fits in with the idea that this lost civilization was more environmentally minded in a way that ours were, not using industrial products and things like that.
Agriculture is then applied to locally available plant species. And we do then see the long process of domestication beginning after the Younger Dryas, not before it. We don't see that domestication occurring before 12,900 years ago. We see some attempts at gathering crops. We see some sheen on sickles that show that people were cutting wild grasses and using the seeds. We do see all of that, but we don't see domestication. The steps that begin to lead us towards domestication begin after the Younger Dryas. And I think that's the elephant in the room. I think that what happened there during the Younger Dryas is extremely mysterious, and I don't think we have the whole story. And I'm simply proposing that the survivors of a civilization who were in very small numbers, traveled around the world seeking refuge, sharing their knowledge with those they took refuge amongst, and sharing the knowledge of those they took refuge amongst. It was an exchange, not a one-way trip, and they did not bring plants and seeds with them. They worked with what was locally available. And that's precisely what we see happening after 12,900 years ago in this whole area of hundreds, thousands of square miles around Göbekli Tepe, going right down into the Jordan Valley. Abu Huraira being a particularly interesting example, very close to Göbekli Tepe, is the first steps being taken towards domestication. There have been multiple attempts to harvest wild grains before that, but no domestication. Suddenly we see the domestication happening. And of course it's happening with locally available plants. I've never said that they introduced plant species from elsewhere.
But if they're introducing the technology of agriculture, that would imply that they had agriculture beforehand, which, as I'm trying to show, it doesn't make any sense. You need to invent new species of plants. You need to go against all the evidence that we have.
What new species of plants? Why do you need to?
Well, because
they were using wild grasses in the area of where they were Hollow 2 in the Jordan Valley. They were using them 23,000 years ago.
in the area of those wild plants.
But they did not domesticate them.
But then what was your civilization growing?
I don't know. What I do know is I don't know. What do you not understand about the word lost? I don't know what they were growing. But what I'm mystified by is this sudden surge towards domestication, which you rightly say is a long, slow process. It doesn't happen overnight. It takes a long time, but we.
And none of what Flint is saying has any bearing on why it starts at the same time. Why these extraordinarily complex megalithic structures just pop up with. And Flint is always talking about how he wants to say, like, the work with the evidence that we have. And the evidence that we have right now is that domestication and these large structures just pop up out of nowhere with no signs of there being some sort of learning curve for them to figure it out. It goes straight from stone tools to making multi-ton stone structures. What is that? Like, these hunter-gatherers lived there for 100,000 years or so, and then they just decided one day, oh, let's make giant stone structures. Why does that make sense? There's also so much weird stuff that happens around this time. There's so many weird things that happen around 12,800 years ago. It's so odd.
It doesn't happen overnight. It takes.
People say suddenly. I think that's a misinterpretation of the evidence. In
What
terms
I'm
of human generations,
what I'm
we're talking
referring to,
hundreds of human generations.
What I'm referring to suddenly.
No, we're
is
not.
the transition from harvesting wild grasses to setting in process a project that will lead to domestication of wild grasses, and that cannot be demonstrated before the Younger Dryas. It can only be demonstrated after the Younger Dryas.
It's not a project. It's just planting them in the ground.
And that's why I think that there's something odd.
And why didn't it
about
happen
the Dryas
before?
episode. And to me, that's something odd when I combine it with mythology from all around the world about the destruction of a great civilization in a global cataclysm, about the fact that there were a few survivors, about the suggestion that they traveled around the world sharing their knowledge and ideas. That's why I think that the spark for the agricultural revolution that we see in that area was introduced.
Like the video, please.
Not the agriculture itself, not the plants themselves. They used locally available plants. They'd be daft.
But to play devil's advocate,
Yeah.
if they did do that, wouldn't
Shut up,
it
Joe.
immediately show up as agriculture?
No.
Why would it take thousands of years for it to take hold?
Because it takes a long time to domesticate plants, as Flint has been saying. It's not something
Well,
you
but
can
you
do
see
overnight.
the shift starting immediately.
You see the shift in 150
That
years.
is
You
what
see
Graham is saying.
immediately at Abu Huraira.
Yes, and then elsewhere, not as early.
But it is also possible that the Younger Dryas impact theory affected the climate, and it made agriculture more possible. And then they figured it out after that because it was colder before that.
Anybody in the comments, you guys got ideas for merch? I'm thinking about doing like Flint Dibble as a pseudo-archaeologist or something like that. Anybody got, if what would I have to put on a hat that you guys would buy it? I've been telling WBS Apparel that I would do it for a while, or if you wouldn't want to buy merch, whatever, that's fine. But a hat, I want a hat. I assemble a trucker hat, or I have this image in my head of a trucker hat that makes fun of Flint Dibble. And I don't know what to put on that example. Maybe Flint Dibble as a pseudo-archaeologist is a little wordy, but I don't know.
That because it was colder before that, right?
Yeah, we've had lots of cold periods in the past. If you go back through the Ice Age.
Put Dibble's hat on.
Right,
a
but
hat.
that's a different species of human almost.
No,
I mean,
no.
They hadn't 400,000 years ago.
400,000 years
Right,
ago.
right, but they hadn't figured out anything that we figured out.
The earliest evidence so far for anatomically modern humans is from Jebel Irhoud in Morocco. It's about 320,000 years old, 315,000 years old, something like that. Anatomically modern humans.
It's true.
So I
Transition would take place for over a period of thousands. dams, boats, seafaring,
Sure.
all those things took place afterwards, right?
Sure.
So there has to be a timeline for all innovation
No,
anyway.
I'm responding to your point. Was the climate shift the trigger for
Right.
agriculture?
It had to be the trigger for something,
what-
right?
what I'm saying
Whenever
is
there's
that-
a massive a change in the environment, people adapt to that change. And if you look at the sophistication levels of societies over the course of hundreds of thousands of years, they always move towards a more sophisticated. They figure out new ways, new
No, they
methods to
don't.
get better at things. It just makes sense that they would eventually figure out agriculture.
In this area, there were multiple attempts to figure out agriculture,
Right, but
they
there
only
was
come.
also probably multiple attempts to figure out how to make a boat before they figured out how to make a submarine.
Yes,
right?
I mean, so I tend to think that what we see with our record is it's very heterogeneous. So that's why we see agriculture showing up at different times in different places. And so I think that that's really key to get across. I do think that this climatic change, it introduced more CO2, it introduced more humidity and rainfall, that made agriculture actually possible, sort of as an intensive undertaking to do. And so I think that that's really important to acknowledge, but I don't want to sort of say that human agency didn't have something to do with that, because humans were the ones that chose to change from just gathering to planting.
Right.
And so I think that's really, really key to demonstrate.
I want to get to Egypt because I think it's one of the most bizarre accomplishments of human beings. And the age of Egypt is a fascinating piece of discussion, because whatever it is, one of the more fascinating things is Robert Schoch out of Boston University, the geologist who examined the erosion in the Temple of the Sphinx and determined it to be thousands of years of rainfall, and which would predate the Sphinx by quite a bit, because this is all stone that had been moved by human beings, and it had been used to construct the Sphinx. And this Temple of the Sphinx had been carved out. It's very clear that it was carved out. And you see these massive fissures that look exactly like water erosion. He specifically said that he showed these images to other geologists without telling them what they were looking at. And they almost unanimously said that it was water erosion over thousands of years of rainfall. And then when he would show them exactly what he was telling them to describe, then they didn't want to have any part of it, because they're like, okay, now you're saying something that's really crazy, because now you're saying that this structure is 11,000 years old as opposed to 4,500 years old.
Surprise, surprise, I'm going to disagree with you.
Shall we look at?
Well, it's not me. It's
No,
Robert Schoch.
Robert Schoch.
Shall we
yeah,
look
yeah,
at some images of the
Yes,
Sphinx?
yeah.
Let's
Let's look at images of the water erosion.
Shall we look at?
Well, it's not me. It's
No,
Robert Schoch.
Robert Schoch.
Shall we
yeah,
look
yeah.
at some images of the
Yes,
Sphinx?
yeah. Let's look at images of the water erosion,
Yeah.
because it's
And then I'll show some images of the quarries nearby.
Let's do that.
Yeah.
Sure.
So if you could hook me up again, Jamie, to the HDMI. And again, credit to my wife Santa, who has taken every risk with me, every step, every dive. Back in the mid-90s somewhere. Sphinx Temple directly in front of the Sphinx, so-called, and the Valley Temple to the left as we view it. And you can see that the Sphinx is a rock-hewn structure cut out of the bedrock with a trench around it.
Okay, guys. Here's what I'm going to do now. I got a couple articles I want to share. I've been talking about doing an article stream for a while. There's a few different articles that I want to go over. So I'm going to take this stream down and I'm going to go live again. Excuse me, in just a little bit. But I remember from the rest of this, there's not much that I want to get to. So maybe there is. I might come back and do the last hour on the stream. I cannot listen to Flint talk for that long. He is just the worst. So I'm going to take this stream down and I'm going to come back on stream in maybe 30, 45 minutes. So look out for that. But thanks for joining me. Like and subscribe if you're not already, and check out my Mayan video that I just released. It's my most recent video. It's about 45 minutes long. I did a live stream with Cam, who is the archaeologist. Oh, maybe it doesn't. I don't know. We'll see. About how the Mayans went to North America and the evidence of Mayan culture on this rattlesnake disc. And there's a video explaining that on the profile. Really good on my channel. So take a look at that. All right.